Matrix. I'm Jonathan, and I'm left of center.
And I'm Rich, and I tend to lean a little bit more to the right. But the bottom line is together we try to look for the balance of what it means to be human in today's world.
All right, let's get started. Welcome to Living in the Matrix, everyone. I'm Jonathan. My co-host Rich is not here with me today. He's out on a work assignment. So I have the pleasure of sharing with you Dr. Jen Van Allen. She is a doctor and has some of the most unique concepts put into language that are so simple to understand. And I thought I wanted to bring her on to share her wisdom. Some of her stuff that I've been downloading has been absolutely amazing. So welcome, Dr. Van Allen. It's a pleasure to
Thank
have you.
you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. So our listeners understand, help us understand where your doctorate is from.
So, I have a doctorate of naturopathic medicine, but I also
Nice.
am trained in understudies of Western medicine. So, and I also studied as a shaman. So, I've studied in Eastern, Western, and Indigenous medicine, which is very unique to be able to bridge the gap between those three fields. And I can do everything from run your labs and look at your T3, T4 with your thyroid to being able to speak to your spiritual journey as far as ayahuasca. And the way that I position it or place it before people is, and having studied all three, I think that Western medicine is the masculine energy of acute treatment. And I think it's fantastic for that. You know, if you are to break or injure something, you need a CT scan right away. I feel like Western medicine is very invasive in that way for a purpose. It's very masculine energy. And I feel like Eastern medicine is very much the feminine energy. It's going inward, that yin energy of going deeper in what's chronic and long term. And then Indigenous medicine is the spiritual journey. It's the bridge between the two.
Mhm.
And so I feel like I have been really blessed in this life to learn the masculine, the feminine, and the spiritual version of all these ways to help people have this human experience.
You have a beautiful perspective. And I love the sort of well-rounded element because there's a lot of value in going deep on those three elements because they do speak to each other very deeply.
Mm.
And as you were talking, I had just a thought, and I thought, tell me if this is your experience that Western medicine, which is very masculine, is very good at solving pain, and Eastern medicine is good at solving suffering. Would you agree with that? Is that kind of
I
the bends?
I I
You don't have
think
to agree with it.
yeah, no, I love what you're posing as an ideal, and so I'm contemplating it. I always kind of look off to the side when I think too.
Hmm.
It's almost as though like there's this very physical, tangible reality, and then there's this part where it's like, how does it play out, you know? And I think Western medicine really strives to achieve that. Um, the numbing, so to speak, the acute, if there's pain and suffering coming in and bringing that to a remedy or to a numbing it and addressing it that way. But I do think Eastern medicine does the same because there are homeopathic remedies, there are Bach flower remedies, there are herbs that immediately get rid of pain and suffering. I mean, immediately.
Hmm.
So I believe both when it comes to pain really do try to be as effective and as fast as possible. Yeah.
Hmm.
I think the difference is that the Western, when it does it because it's synthetic, all pharmaceuticals, like them or not, they're synthetic, and I really do think they have a place. Um, but yeah, they're synthetic, and so they're forcing the body to do something in a much more aggressive, like that masculine energy. But it's not
Hmm.
actually because it's forcing so fast and so hard. It's not giving the time for the body to catch up to the storyline of cell turnover or what was underlying of why the body was expressing that symptom.
Yeah.
Where I feel like with Eastern, it can aggressively come in and deal with the pain, but it does so in a way that the herbs continue having that story with the body to unfold over time.
Wow. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
No, it's because I am only recently really learning about masculine and feminine energy,
Hmm.
and that's I grew up a Christian, and we
Me
don't talk
too.
about energies. So you
I'm actually a
understand the
Bible believing
journey,
Christian. I
right?
literally am, which
I
is a quirky cat for me because I'm a Bible believing Christian, but I speak about
right,
chakras and meridians and can prove them with MRI scans.
right.
And
They're
my father was
scientific,
elder. Yes, my father was
right,
elder for over 20 years, and yet I believe everybody is on their own journey and God meets you where you are. But
right.
I similar thing. I grew up Bible believing Christian, and this was all a new. This was all
Well,
new
it
to
was
me.
really
Yeah.
considered taboo,
Yeah,
you
it was
know?
considered that you're opening yourself
Right,
to darkness. That's how it was worded, right? In the Christian church, you're opening yourself to darkness.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
Hmm.
think it's, I think we're coming into a point of time when people are waking up to the energetic level, which is quantum physics. It's
Mm,
not
which,
just woo woo, it's quantum physics. And people are
yeah,
waking up to the reality. And I think there's a merging happening where they're beginning to communicate better together. So,
I agree. So I offer a bunch of different things, and one of them is a private community and a practitioner training. And in the private community and the practitioner training, there's something that I teach in both of those places, which is that no matter what your belief system is on how humans came to be, most peoples believe in the story of there being a tree of knowledge of good and evil. But if you go back to
mhm,
ancient Hebrew in the Septuagint, it's actually chaos and order, which later in the Bible, which is the Hebrew, the Muslims, and the Christian, the three major religions believe this
mhm,
portion of it. It says God is the God of chaos and order. And when you look at the yin and yang, it's chaos and order.
yeah.
And the in between is the flow, and that's the spirit, constantly flowing. And we see that even in the Bible, it says rivers of living water. That spirit is the Holy Spirit, is the flow. But the chaos and order, no matter what your belief system is, I think that's what brought about epigenetics and why people then went to dying and death is because when they knew of chaos, they were misplaced from their trust and they were not yet spiritually ready to know of that chaos. And so, because they knew the chaos, they went to this place called fear. And fear is what turns on epigenetic expressions of death and disease.
Okay.
Mhm.
Now we're diving in, which is I think is awesome. Help for a layman understand what you just said, because I know what you
Okay.
mean. But for a layman, like a fourth grader, how would you
Yes.
describe what you just said about?
Yeah, when you are in the kitchen and there's cookies and the cookies are there. You don't know what's going on with cookies, but they're there and you're just not supposed to touch them. You don't know why, but just not yet. And all of a sudden you go to touch the cookies and they break.
Mhm,
The glass jar on the floor breaks. All of a sudden your nervous system, your body, your brain immediately goes to a reactive state because of the chaos. Because what you didn't
mhm,
expect happened. And it was
right.
unexpected. It was unknown. And it's the unknown that we're no longer in that place of trusting because you can trust what you know, you can trust what you see, but once you are in the unknown, the chaos, that's where the reaction comes
Mhm,
and that nervousness comes and that fear comes. And when that happens, that's when there's a disconnect because whoever enters that kitchen that next moment, you immediately go to, I didn't do it. I didn't mean to. I'm really sorry. And your nervous system will immediately go to fight of saying, it wasn't me. It was your fault. You shouldn't have left him
mhm,
out
right.
or flight freeze fawning of shutting down and running away. And that moment that you go to that nervous system response, that fear response, that actually is what turns on all sorts of things in your body that lead to death and disease. It
Mhm,
shuts down your detoxification. It shuts down your digestion. It shuts down what's
mhm.
called methylation. It shuts down all these abilities for you to thrive because you're in fear versus trust, in response to chaos versus order.
So what I hear you
Okay.
saying is that we create our own physiological problems that manifest as
Yeah,
disease.
that's proven. Yeah, and there's a variety of there's supposedly nothing new under the sun, right?
Mhm,
There's a variety of modalities, healing modalities or beliefs that say the same thing. Traditional Chinese medicine proves this. German new medicine, which is what it's been out for about 10 years now, proves it. They call it psychosomatics.
mhm.
Yeah, we see it again and again that the body is our physical expression of what we're emotionally and mentally doing, not the other way around. Yeah.
Wow. So you have a method called the flow method.
Hmm.
Unpack that for me and first what it is, and then we'll talk about how you invented it, but or came up with it, or just unpack it for us.
I get really giddy when you say this. I can feel my body go, Okay, so I feel like I should have brought charts here. Okay, so if you're looking at Western medicine and Eastern medicine,
Mhm.
both forms of medicine are looking at the the client or the patient coming in and saying what's wrong and how do we stop it from being wrong. Both are approaching that of how do I stop it with synthetic medication or
Mhm.
cutting or, surgery or whatever, or how do I stop it with herbs and remedies and diet? But both is how do I suppress based on this first belief of there being a problem? The flow method is completely different. And instead, we begin with a goal of allowing someone to think, what would you want your life to be like? Not what are you running away from? And
Mhm.
so that position is so different before we unpack the rest of the flow method. I cannot tell you how many
It's a
patients I've
mindset.
had. Yes, that when they come in, and which now I do online appointments, but when I ask them what would you like your life to be like after I created the flow method, they'd say, I don't even know. And I said, well, if you don't know, then you don't have the brain pattern, the thoughts, the
Mhm.
biochemical processes to create what you want,
Yeah.
relationship wise, financial wise, or health wise.
Mhm.
And they go, oh my gosh, you're right. And then they proceed to tell me, but I have this, and this wrong. And I go, okay. And I slow them down and I write down the things that are wrong. And then from there, in speaking with them in the flow method, I then go back again, create a goal and figure out what are those things when I'm listening to them is almost like the deepest root within their nervous system pattern that is leading to all of these varieties of branching off of symptoms. So in that conversation, I'm able to still come back and create a goal. And that's what the flow method always begins with is a goal. What are we actually working towards as a new pattern for the brain and the body to achieve? Whether it be for your relationships or your finances or your money. So we begin with that new pattern and verifying that that pattern would work for that person. We can't have a goal of like, you're going to grow a third leg. Not going to happen.
Mhm.
But we can check with the subconscious and conscious, create a new goal. And then after that, the second step of the flow method is anything that doesn't agree with that on a subconscious and conscious level. We're able to walk through a variety of approaches and techniques I've created to release those brain patterns, literally in real time, releasing those brain patterns. I want to explain how that happens because people go, how do you just do that in real time? Right? Well, just like you can walk into a room and somebody can drop a lamp and it shatter, immediately you create a new brain pattern as a reaction next time every time you see a lamp or every time you see that room, right? You have a new brain pattern. How would I react to the lamp? Just the same, if we're able to find what brain patterns are not agreeing with our goal
Mhm.
and then find why the subconscious is wanting to do it, which is never self-sabotage, then I can offer it something that it can do instead to still achieve the goal of love, touch, money, whatever it's wanting to achieve,
Mhm.
but with less energy. And once I offer it a way to achieve that same goal with less energy, it then
Mhm.
aligns to the original goal. And it completely overnight, it can take up to a few minutes, up to 2 weeks for you to completely no longer even have that brain pattern in your body, in your fascia, anywhere anymore.
Mhm.
So much so that there's times where it happens so fast, depending on the person's processing speed and the brain pattern, that by the end of the appointment, when I ask them about how they feel about that issue compared to the beginning of the appointment, they go, I don't even remember having that issue. It's
Mhm.
gone. And then the third part of the flow method is us again remembering whatever that goal is. We got rid of whatever doesn't agree. And now then we come in with nutritional changes or fuel support of supplements, medications, whatever it may be, to support the body and the brain and the mind, everything achieving that goal.
Hmm.
And that's how it works. Yeah.
So it's a three-step method. Chart
Yeah.
those down again.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are the
So
three?
yeah, it's really I came up with it based on the toroidal field, which is the yin yang, the
Mhm.
flow of energy in all things, right?
Mhm.
Is everything's the toroidal field. So the first one is that masculine. It's the asserting what's my goal. The
What's the
second one is
goal?
the feminine. It's the removing
Mhm.
what no longer is.
Mhm.
And then the third one is the support. It's that conversation of that flow between the two for it to happen and come to achieving that masculine goal.
Have you ever heard of the Infinite One by Walter Russell?
I love him. Like
Have you
if
read his work?
I did. I read his
So have you
work.
read his work on sex? It's chapter
No,
8 of Infinite One. And I want to bring that up
no.
here because he talks about that specifically, that the order of the duality is masculine, because the masculine is the electricity and the feminine is the magnetic. But then he
Hmm.
said it's the feminine back to the masculine.
You know what? I take that back. I read, name the one book again, The Order of One. Okay, I haven't read The Order of One,
Infinite One.
The Infinite One. I haven't read that one, but I
Yeah.
did read a few of his other books, and I do take it back that believe that I remember him referencing it in one of his other books.
Yeah.
Um, because it's the same base knowledge again and again that he
Hmm.
taught, which is brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah, I spent $150 on one of his books like 10 years ago before like anybody. I'm serious because you couldn't get it. It was like on eBay. And it's one of those things that you don't know why you're called to it and it just
Right.
ends up in front of you. Walter Russell was one of those things where it's like I don't even know how it ended up in front of me when I was like searching, the web for a variety of things, and all of a sudden I saw this thing of Walter Russell, and it just resonated so deeply with me that I remember tearing up and going, "That's truth," whatever that was. And so I had to have the book, and so I remember paying like $150 for his book, and I still have it today. But I've ordered a few other little books since then. But I love his work. Yeah.
See, I want to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. You told me you grew up as a Christian, and I've never stopped following Jesus. Jesus is the one that taught me to practice love. I
Yes.
credit Jesus with that journey. And here I am 40 years later going, it was totally worth it. And here's the thought is Jesus gave everyone a goal. It was called kingdom.
Mm.
It was this
Hmm.
idea that everybody was in grace. And I've always found that to be an outstanding goal for any human being.
I love.
And
Yeah.
go ahead.
I, on one hand, like I appreciate that I'm on your podcast. On the other hand, if we were in person, I'd be like, truly, I would. So I guess it's good that we're slowing it down on a podcast. Yeah. So I don't believe in the Lord Jesus Christ because it was just necessarily what I was taught. It's because time and time again, there's power in His name, and I don't have to know why. I
Hmm.
just know for me personally, in my experience, that's true.
Hmm.
And also I think that's where any kind of belief of any kind of relationship gets stuck. Is an example I give to people is your relationship that you have with any person in your life, we'll say your wife, your best friend, whoever, will not be the same relationship that anyone else has with them. It doesn't matter, it won't be the same relationship. So how we all
Mm,
experience God, how we all experience Jesus will be different for each one of us, and we see that even in the Bible.
right.
No two people experience Jesus the same. None of His disciples did. So I'm never here to say this is how you should experience God or Jesus. I just can say this is what's true to me in my journey. And in my years along the way, one of the things I thought as I'm learning, he's put on my heart a renewing the mind. All the work I do is helping people have a renewing the mind, which is empowering to them. It's quietly my personal mission is empowering people as there's this transition and they're so inundated with AI and chaos in the world. How do we bring people to a proactive state versus reactive? Because we were made in the spirit of power and love, not fear and timidity, right? Power, love,
Hmm.
and sound mind is the verse. And so that's always been my heart's mission is how do I get people to being in a renewing of the mind and standing in and walking in that power, love, and sound mind versus the fear and timidity. And along the way, one of the things that came to my mind was, wow, the Bible is this journey that is like threefold, just like the journey we have as our human experience with God, with our parents, and our own
Hmm.
brain growing up. There's the Old Testament, which is all the law. You have to understand like logic and rhetoric. You have to understand the names of things and what they are and what to do and what not to do. Not because that's the end of the conversation, but because you have to understand the meaning of it. Then the
Hmm.
next portion is you're rebellious. You're just like a teenager and you're super rebellious. You're pushing every button, right? And you're just like, "Rah," right? And we have to, because otherwise, without us pushing, we don't learn autonomy. We don't learn
Hmm.
where it's safe to play if we don't push the boundaries, right? Um, and so the Old Testament is just like kids when they go to a playground. I use this analogy. The first thing the kids always do is they set up a structure. Every time they go to a playground, they always go, these are the rules. This is what we're going to play.
Hmm.
Right.
Right.
They always do it. And then after that, then it's the chaos ensues, right? Where they push the boundaries. And that's our teenage years. And that's where the grace comes in. And then the last part is the spirit. You're in this wisdom. You pushed against it, you've learned what holds fast, you've learned what doesn't, and now you're in this wisdom. So it was like the knowledge and the law, and then the grace and the pushing the boundaries, and then the wisdom. And so
Yeah, because
I
we don't
yeah.
need complete grace. Wisdom is knowing how to use both.
Yeah, you
Wisdom
have to have
is
knowledge with
knowing both
wisdom.
sides of the duality. It's
Yeah.
realizing they both have value to teach us something. Because I think
Mm-hmm.
that's I we could probably talk for hours.
That's what I was saying. I could tell. I was like, wow, this is great.
Well, because here's what I think is coming. So I work in UX, which is user experience for software development. Okay. And in the beginning, for me, it was product design. But what I really realized as I started to mature in it is that it's a study of how people do things.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized, when my daughter was 6, I started taking her to neurofeedback. And I started reading about neuroscience to understand my daughter and ended up wanting to read it for myself. And I think we're waking up to a period where science is catching up to the rhetoric and saying, okay,
Mm-hmm.
this body is an energetic system. It has a
Mm-hmm.
nervous system. Like nobody really understood the value or the impact of the nervous system 20 years ago. And we're
Mm-hmm.
waking up to that mental health reality. And the flow map, I want to dive in here is people get stuck in patterns. And what I'm learning in neuroscience is that's exactly how the brain works. The brain creates a prediction of reality and then looks for the evidence to support it. So it's complete confirmation bias, but nothing breaks the barrier. Nothing external can break that barrier to the internal. But the
Mm-hmm.
prediction is then either rewritten or restructured.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that simple. We script ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when we realize, and here's the value of realizing that one fact is you can change the script.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered that over the last 40 years by practicing love. But you've brought the science to it. And I think that's help. I want to talk about the dark periods, dark night of the soul that build the survival patterns. Unpack that idea that you bring and help us
Mm.
understand that.
I have a very different I have a very unique belief system about that and explanation of it. So people very often ask me about, well, what is a brain pattern? What is it that you're talking about that you change brain patterns? Is it trauma? Is it inner child? It's not trauma or inner
Mm-hmm.
child. Our brain pattern can be positive and our brain pattern can be negative. Our body doesn't think
Mm-hmm.
of anything as a brain pattern of positive, negative. So before
Right.
I get to how I think of it, I have to explain some base knowledge. There's one truth that every single body's body actually processes in before is food or supplements good or bad, before is a belief system good or bad, before is an experience good or bad. And that is one truth: survival through energy conservation.
Mm-hmm.
Every single cell of your being is constantly scanning for energy conservation,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, survival through energy conservation. That is actually why we create and store any pattern, positive or negative. It's why we store
Mm-hmm.
the smell of grandma's cookies as much as it's because we store the good too. We store generations of good. Everybody's like, oh, it's the bad stuff. We store the good.
Here's the science of it. The science is that's the most effective computer system that exists. Is
Yes.
that system? That's the value of it. So the body's extremely efficient. It looks for
Yes.
simplicity that works.
Yes, it looks for return on investment is how kind of the way I
Yes.
can explain it when I in my courses
Yes.
and to my students. And we actually have you can get to the science of it. We have a crystalline cellular matrix within every single cell. That's what makes up our fascia. We're literally computers. We're walking, talking computers, right? That
Mm-hmm.
we are. And anybody who wants to look it up, you can. I put it in layman's terms. So really, the first thing is survival through energy conservation, and it's survival, not thriving, surviving, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you make it through any situation and you survived, you will continue to do whatever you did. That's how it works. And when people go
Wait,
to
wait,
is
wait, wait, wait. Hold on a quick second. What do you mean you will continue doing? What does it
Whatever you
continue to
did.
do?
So let's say that you made it
You
from point
repeat
A
the
to point
pattern.
B. Yes, you made it from
Got
point
it.
A to point B while driving down the road and you made it there safely. Guess what you're going to subconsciously do tomorrow? You're going to try to
Okay.
take that same route, right? That's not
Hmm.
trauma, but yet it's stored. So the
Hmm.
belief that we're storing trauma and that's why we're perpetuating things is absolutely false. And it keeps people in this false narrative of chasing trauma and chasing inner child, as opposed to looking at it from this neutral point and this open mindedness of what are my patterns, just like a computer program that I get to upgrade.
Hmm.
When you're able to step back with that and that neutrality and go, this is just a program. That's all that it is. I made it through by doing this. That's a program. How can I see what programs I want to upgrade and do better? Then you're optimizing everything in your life. And that's how
Hmm.
I approach it. That does not mean that I'm gaslighting that your trauma that you went through wasn't reality. It was.
Hmm.
I went through severe trauma as a child, but yet with all the modalities I learned, the more that you talk about it, the more that you're experiencing it, the more that you are creating. I survived by this. I'm going to continue doing this. So you
And
ingrain it.
yeah, it's dwelling. Like people don't realize if they sit there and think about it for the next 4 days, they're literally scripting themselves over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah, and the reason why, so that's a great point, and there's two things to that. There's a 20-year study done, and I don't even remember the study, but if you were to Google it, there's a 20-year study done on talk therapy, and they found out that the people who, from the beginning to end, were doing the talk therapy, they actually they began identifying with that trauma because that became their identity. And the reason I explain it that way is our, if you were to plant a seed, that's an experience. The more that you water that seed, the more that that root system grows.
Yeah.
Our nervous system is literally a root
Yep.
system, right?
Yep. Just like
A good
mycelium.
seed bears good fruit. A
Hmm.
bad seed bears bad fruit, right? Philippians, think upon whatever is true, right? Honorable, pure,
Right.
lovely, excellent, and praiseworthy. You know, if you want to go scripturally, if you want to do it as far as quantum science and quantum physics, well, what it's in it, you know, they teach it that observation creates reality. No, intention creates observation, which then creates reality. It's your
Hmm.
intention. You can
Hmm.
experience something incredibly horrible. Let's say that you got a D in school and you're like, oh my gosh, I got a D in school, this is horrible. The same person can get a D and go, you know what, that means that I get to take this test again and try it again and do even better and get an A. I thought I was only going to get a C anyway, right? And so being able to set the intention creates the observation of the reality. That's why when we're looking at everything through the ideal or lens of this is traumatic or not versus this is a brain pattern, just this is just a
Hmm.
computer program, how can we optimize it? You stay in those patterns longer because it becomes your identity. You get stuck in the emotion, which is energy in motion, versus
Hmm.
creating what's new.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it becomes long-term perpetuating because I think part of the survival mechanism for holding on to all that, I just call it bullshit. We're establishing patterns that actually destroy us, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
the loop that I think that the original tree always said it's unto death.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we do that to our body, we literally give it dis-ease, which becomes disease, and we're like, oh, I have cancer. And it's, well, that's because your body couldn't fight what you were scripting it with. And it's hard to
Mm.
shift to that idea that
Well,
we
and
have that much power over our own body.
well, that the techniques I agree. Yeah, I do agree, and that's why I've come up with techniques that can shift people's brain patterns so fast because within like 10 minutes people start going, "Holy crap, that makes like I literally see and approach it differently." Um, but
Are you establishing permanence or is that a first experience? Because you can't write a neural pathway in 10 seconds.
oh, yeah, you can.
Well,
We
you can
yeah,
start it.
you can start it, yeah, but okay, so
Yeah.
you can definitely start it, but here's the thing. It's not just the starting, it's the releasing of the old. We're back to survival through energy conservation.
Hmm.
So this is how fast it can happen when we're saying we can't do
Yeah.
that. Okay, let's say that you're walking down a path and all of a sudden a coyote comes at you. And you know next time you get on the path, watch out for the coyote, right?
Hmm.
Now, let's say that we were able to give you a faster way to watch out for that coyote or walk down that path where you no longer have to watch out for that coyote. You would immediately
Hmm.
release the needing to watch out for that coyote. That's the difference. When you're able to come in and give the survival brain a way to shift it a way to approach the same situation faster with less energy, it'll immediately start shifting because it
Hmm.
prioritizes saving energy. It wants to save energy.
Well, but here's the thing from a habit perspective, and I'm not saying you're wrong or anything like that. It's just I'm listening to the science of how that works, but I know people also operate off of habits, and habits become unscripted. So it requires, I think you can start immediately. I
Mhm.
think that's what salvation is the awareness, and you just stay on the path, but it
Mhm.
requires the intention to stay in that mindset because it's the other pathway still exists. And in a lot of times it's a highway. So
If the
it's, we can struggle with that.
Yeah, it depends. So let's say that we're doing an affirmation. People
Hmm.
have asked that about my work too. An affirmation does not offer the survival brain a way to approach a situation with less energy in which it feels it can trust it. You're
Hmm.
asking yourself to expand and
Right.
create more trust. If you're
Right.
able to offer the brain a way that it can approach the same situation without having to establish trust, where it still feels like it's a reaction, a stress response, but with
Hmm.
less energy, it'll immediately take to that because it's a stress response with less energy versus a proactive response that takes more energy. And I think
Hmm.
that's where it's like this the science hasn't caught up with that. They haven't even tested that. That
Hmm.
hasn't even been tested to say, okay, this is your survival stress response. Let's give you another survival stress response that uses less energy. Check your subconscious and check your conscious, see if it'll agree, and then see how fast that will shift. Like the doctor who
That's a provocative idea though.
it's what I do. That's what the flow method does. It's what I
No,
do every
I mean, to validate that so the scientific community can see the evidence, or has it
That'd be
already been done?
fun. I would love to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would love to. So, when I worked with the doctor who trained me and gave me my residency in the basics of the QEG brain practitioner training, he didn't believe that was possible, and I worked on him and without the brain scanner, I worked on him using the tools that I have, and and I was able to tell him in real time when certain events happened to him and how he responded and offer him other responses if he could rewrite that memory on a conscious, not hypnotherapy, consciously rewrite that memory with a new survival response. And we walked through that. And this is a thick German accent man, was
Hmm.
crying. And afterwards, so we had scanned his brain before, we scanned it after. That was worth multiple biofeedback sessions because the brain shifted so fast. Because again, survival through energy conservation. If you can offer it a faster way to survive
Right.
with less energy versus an affirmation is I'm going to be a millionaire tomorrow. Well, that's great, but that requires us showing up. What are we going to do with the millions? What about when we get
Hmm.
the millions? Where do we put it?
Hmm.
What if our family wants millions? That's a lot of energy, right?
Yeah, it is.
Versus rewriting a survival stress response with a survival stress response that uses less energy.
Well, I think that's the brilliance of love is love always leads to the greatest outcome. And I can, the more, this is the journey I've had for the last 2 years of really listening to what has been the outcome of following Jesus for 40 years. And it really is that I think the missing piece for most people is grace, like to fully embrace
Mm.
grace, but to fully embrace grace, you have to give it to everyone else. It's just a flat all or none. It's grace. That is the operating system of the universe. And when you start there, everybody then starts in grace. And that idea has always kind of matched this kingdom idea. I think that's an old world, but it's this idea where things belong. It's family, it's you belong and you can find your place. But because you have grace, you have the energy to now focus on, you're not in survival state anymore. Grace takes you out of survival state. And that would mean scientifically it's leading to the most economic and efficient way of living.
That's true if you can bring people's subconscious to that. So an
Yeah,
example
yeah.
of what you're saying in what I do that actually it is what you're saying. Um, so this week I had an appointment with a patient who had been viciously raped not once but
Hmm.
twice.
Hmm.
To say to her, "Hey, have grace. Grace for yourself, grace for that person."
Hmm.
Rightfully so, her survival brain and her body, her physical body, should not be able to do that. She would not be able to survive, right? I mean, she wouldn't. If her body was able to just imagine, yeah, next time that happens, I'm just going to lay down and die. Jesus said, greater love has no one than this, that you would lay down your
Mhm.
life for your brother and die. That's for him, not unto him. There's a difference with that. There's a very vast difference with that. And so, yeah, what
But
I
let me
did
ask you a
in,
question. Does
yeah,
that person in holding on to that survival mechanism live out the consequences of holding on to it? I think it's a pragmatic issue. It's not a
well,
moral, it's never a moral issue.
it doesn't matter if she does or doesn't, the brain will continue unless you offer it something with that uses less energy, because that's God's design for our body's survival.
Mhm.
He's created us that way. You cannot with your prefrontal cortex undo that. And grace is a prefrontal cortex. It's not survival brain. It's
Oh, oh
100%
yeah.
prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
So there's no way that
Yes.
she could even choose to do that. She couldn't choose to do that unless she has a freeing of that system to offer her a different way that uses less energy and release that. So in the appointment, what we did was I walked her through a
Mhm.
visualization. In that
Mhm.
visualization, it is an embodiment of grace. It is her in the visualization. There's a bunch to it, but in the
Mhm.
visualization, while awake, she's able to go back to whatever space and time she was with those brain patterns there that's in her
Mhm.
body, and she's able to walk through the technique that I bring in that makes her feel safe while she does it, to then express whatever she would wanted to express that allows her to feel safe, to completely destroy it. There are times where in that visualization people have imagine burning someone, imagine lighting a house on fire, imagine destroying the bed in which they were hurt, whatever it is. They're able to
Mhm.
have the grace for themselves to display the things that their survival brain wanted to be able to put forward to feel safe, that they couldn't in that situation.
Mhm.
As they're able to walk through that grace for themselves and accepting that's what they needed to do to survive, but they couldn't do, their body then goes, okay, now how can I imagine that person, that environment, whatever, neutralized? And their body will neutralize that memory and will release those
Hmm.
survival patterns, because they're no longer trying to hold, this is what I needed to do to survive. Now they go, okay, I did this, I rewrote it, this is what I wanted to do to survive. And also I brought in the things where they felt trust as though they've survived, they're on the other side, because I
Mhm.
literally connect the current brain pattern with the old brain pattern in real time by
Mhm.
doing that. So the part of them that knows I survived, I'm on the other side, is going back to the part going, what did I need to do to survive? And then it comes to cohesiveness. In the beginning of the
Mhm.
visualization, whenever I walk these people through this, I ask them in real time to imagine them hugging or accepting them at that time and seeing if that person
Mhm.
will hug them back. They won't even hug themselves back, because their survival brain at that point is
Mhm.
so broken and so holding on for everything, they won't even imagine accepting a hug from themselves. By the end of it, they're able to hug themselves, they're able to be hugged by
Mhm.
themselves and receiving that grace and that love, and everything that they experienced is neutralized. Yeah.
So that kind of leads to this new way of operating, because it's so similar to the just the simple practice of love, which I think is to state the positive in our life, to constantly deposit positive, I am loved.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, we release ourselves from the 87% of the things we worry about that never come true.
Mm-hmm.
And we have enough energy to live a really vibrant life and deal with the 13% that actually does come true.
Mm-hmm.
And so that new way of living is what you call thriving. What is thriving for you?
I think thriving for every person is going to be different, because the coding that a dandelion is meant to express and embody is different than an oak tree.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think thriving would be able to have the freedom and energy and connection with God and the purpose of what they're here by God's design to embody,
Hmm.
to be able to have the resources to do that. Yeah, I mean the Bible says even the rocks cry out to him, to his glory. I think I think thriving is being able to rejoice and embody what his design is for you. Yeah.
How has thriving showed up for you? Because I assume you practice your own flow method. It sounds like you do.
I do. Yes. I actually can do it while driving. I can go through the whole like scan sheet and work on myself. Um Yeah, I would say in so many ways. I I have lived through in my life probably every situation that somebody could say, or I'd say 90% of situations that humans could say would be traumatic.
Mhm.
Um, I have been impoverished, I have been broken, I have been bruised, I have been sick, I have miscarried. I mean, I've been through the ringer, right? But I would say that I can genuinely wake up every day trusting God's mercy is new every day and rejoicing, and my nervous system, my mind, my body, it's very proactive in every day seeing what would I delight in doing today
Mhm.
versus what do I have to get done, or what am I running from, or what am I suppressing. Every day is like that. Like literally every day is just very it's like, ah, it's very peaceful, it's very calm, it's very happy. And yeah, there's a lot in the Bible about that actually says, peace that passes understanding. I would say that's probably the best way to describe it, is a peace that passes understanding every single day. Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit and ask, because I realize I haven't. What was it like growing up for you? Did you grow up in a family that embraced Jesus? What was your
So
background
me
like?
personally, I from ages 0 to 5, my dad was military, so he would come and go, and my mother was a really really strong drug addict, and when my dad was
Mm,
home, she was okay, and then when he was gone, she was horrible. Like there were times where we'd have like no food or water for 3 days, and CPS would show up, and then the whole cycle would begin again. So, for my formative years, where you're creating most of your brain patterns, is 0 to 7. So, for me, 0 to 5 was a lot of very traumatic physical, sexual abuse, starvation.
mm,
Just, I remember being 3 and sleeping at the park because it was safer to sleep under the merry-go-round than it was in my house.
mm,
So I had really 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 horrific childhood from 0 to 5, and then after that I was in foster care for a little while, and then my dad got remarried when I was around 7, and at that time him and his my stepmom didn't go to church or anything. My dad grew up in the church, but he didn't go. And I remember they started going a couple months after they got married, maybe a year after they got married. So I was around 8. Maybe I was actually, I think I was closer to 9 when they started going. And I remember really clearly seeing my dad going from this military man who was gruff and he was a drill instructor and was swearing and just ornery and really aggressive and assertive. Um, to being someone who was sitting at my little Tykes table with my sister, and I had a little Tykes table by that point when I was around 9, and he was in the room sitting at the little Tykes table with another man, regularly praying and studying
mm,
God's word. And I remember he wasn't swearing and he wasn't drinking, and I remember that change in him so drastic
mm.
that it's like um I can't have asked God for a more beautiful story of a testimony that I got to walk through in my
Mm.
life and a lot of people's lives. Not just that, but a lot of people that I've worked with over the years, to see the night and day transformation of them. But my dad is probably one of the ones that is most precious and dear to my heart.
Well, because it was
And
real to your story. Yeah.
yeah, it was real to my story, and it was also so significant, so night and day, and so quick too for him to go through that. And so then after that I was baptized around 10, and I think there was a lot of stability in the home then, other than my dad would come and go a lot, still being military.
Hmm.
And there was definitely still trauma that unfolded after that, what over the next few years up until I was 18 and I moved out. This was a blended family, and they both came from a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of stuff when you have blended family, and so there's still continuing of trauma after that. But um my dad over those years became an elder in the church, and it was really beautiful to have, for me personally, that hope of the message of the gospel. And at the same time, I can say, in looking back, I remember being in my early 20s to late, like mid 30s, and also coming to this other side of my walk and understanding of God, of realizing how much people who grew up in any religion
Mhm.
really go to this survival stress response of disassociating and tapping out because some higher power is going to come in and fix it. And so they're actually not showing up
Are they fight
proactively
or
in their
flight?
life. Yeah, they're not showing up proactively in their life because they're like, well, if it's God's will, well, if it's God's will, well, I'm
Mhm.
just going to pray about it.
Right.
And I remember coming to this very other part of my personal journey in my life, and also my faith, and going, wow, this is really not okay. There's so many people that are in religious organizations, including Christianity, that are silenced and suppressed, and in addition are given this mentality of, just when it's hard, just surrender, tap out, disassociate, pray about it, and blame God for why it is or isn't being done, as
Mhm.
opposed to actively participating in co creation and that authority and accountability that we still have today. Yeah.
What is that authority?
Well, the authority that we have, I mean, it's scientifically, scripturally, religiously. You know, we're constantly co-creating, right? So scientifically, we could begin with intention, observation, reality. That's the authority right there. We are accountable for that. We see that every day. As far as scripturally, um, we were given dominion over the earth, and we never lost that. And the three major religions still today don't believe that. I mean, like that, they all believe in that story of the Garden of Eden, but they never lost that. They were just kicked out of the garden, which was a separation from walking regularly with God, but they still have dominion and accountability and authority. And even Christians in the New Testament were considered the bride of Christ, we're considered ambassadors for Christ, we're considered the royal priesthood. There's an authority in that. You wouldn't want your
Mhm.
bride to walk with you and just go, oh, well, it's all my husband's fault. It's my husband's fault. It's my husband's fault. You know, the good and the bad, it's just my husband's fault. You know, there's an authority and accountability to be able to walk in power, love, and sound mind, as opposed to fear and timidity and just tapping out. And so we genuinely have authority as, bless you.
Excuse me.
Yeah, we generally have authority as co-creators, and the ability to think through things in day to day and over our body. Yeah.
So I want to take some time to make sure we cover the concept of human design,
Oh,
because a
okay.
friend of mine introduced me to it I actually heard about it almost a year ago from someone I follow on Instagram, but I've never dived into it. I think I tried, but I realized I don't know the moment I was born. And so I don't
Mm,
have the third part, and I have to order my birth certificate. But it keeps coming up,
hmm.
and I hear more and more people talk about it. What is it?
So, human design is a combination of I Ching, or I Ching, from traditional Chinese medicine that's been around for
Mhm.
thousands of years. And I Ching was the belief back. Actually, I Ching itself is amazing. It's this belief that as humans, in this human experience, there's essentially 64 lessons that any of us can understand or walk through, and those 64 lessons cover the entire human experience. And we may not learn all of them, but there's 64 of them, and each of them have
Mhm.
6 steps to completion. Like you're learning how to build a
Mm.
birdhouse, and you learn a little better, a little bit better, a little bit better, right? Each of the 64 has 6 steps to it.
Okay.
Now, with that being said, each of those 64 actually correlates with amino acids and what's called codon rings, which now we know is our genetics and epigenetics, which is
Mhm.
amazing and mind blowing. So that's how I got introduced to the study of human design, because I study epigenetics and was delving into that information and that link there. It's a very little known link of how those tie together, but it's fantastic. So human design is the ability to look at the information that is specifically you through the
Mhm.
lens of I Ching, and also astrology, and also traditional Chinese medicine, and also some teachings by a man who believed certain things of what those of how to put those together to make almost like a personality chart of what you're going to experience here. So if you were to think of like an enneagram, personality chart, human design is like that on steroids, essentially, because it's not just your personality chart. It also has to do with the environment that's best for your body, the foods that are best for your body, the way that you
Hmm.
interact with the world that's best for your body, the experiences that you're going to be experiencing here as life lessons for yourself. It's amazing, and you could spend your whole life looking at your chart and learning it. Um, I think one of the biggest takeaways from anyone who's looking at human design, I would say the two biggest things to look at if you pull your chart, which you can pull it for free anywhere, and there are people who can find your time of birth as well. But I think the two biggest things to look at is which of the five main types of personality you are. There's five main types of personality. There's a generator, a manifester, a manifesting generator, a projector, and a reflector. And those are the five main types. Depending on who you are, is going to tell you essentially a lot about your energy and day. If you are a generator, you have stable energy pretty much every day. Even though you're a woman, women have a 28-day energy hormone cycle, men have a 24-hour energy cycle. But overall, if you're a generator, you can pretty much say yes to a product and usually see it through. You have a battery to do that. If you are a manifester, you're kind of all over the place. It's like God's given you and designed you to like be gung ho on manifesting and asserting yourself to like one key thing to get that done. Everything else kind of like you get the laundry done when you can, kind of a thing,
Hmm.
right? If you're a manifesting generator, you're a combination of the two, and it comes and goes. If you're a projector, then you're me, and you're less than 20% of the population, and you are the prophets, the sages, the gurus. You are the people who are here to hear directly from God or the universe, whatever your belief system is, and lead others and be a guide. You don't have constant energy. Very much the way that I understand it is like Elijah in the Bible would sit by the river and just be fed by ravens because he was overpeopled. He was just done. I believe Elijah probably would have been a projector back in the day. We're given a lot of information in a small amount of time, and we do a lot of work in a small amount of time that's concentrated, and then we kind of tap out. A reflector, your energy is just kind of reflecting the moon cycle. So one would be finding your personality type. It's also how other people feel you. As a projector, when I get on a screen, people feel me immediately, like immediately to their core. It's just part of what happens. That's a projector thing. The other thing I would say to look at is look at your what's called your authority. Your authority is the way that your intuition speaks to you. So all of us have a God-given nervous system, which is our internal barometer of our our intuition, right? And like I just have a gut feeling, or I don't know, that feels off to me, or something like that. Everybody's intuition is going to speak a little bit differently to them. And there's different kinds of authorities, which is different kinds of intuition. So, for example, I'm a splenic authority. I hear a yes or a no right away. Like if a lion was chasing me, I'm not going to sit here and think, well, how do I feel? And let me process. I'd be dead, right? So I have a very fast authority, a very fast intuition. You can ask me a question, I hear a yes or no right away. And also, that's why I think people who probably have the gift of prophecy, like I do, that's probably why we hear it right away, because we have that authority to hear that way. Um, if you are someone with an emotional authority, you're the person who it's good to know that, because an emotional authority person is someone who they might immediately say yes or no to an opportunity, but really they need to sleep on it. Because if they say yes, a couple days later, they're the person who feels bad and goes, actually, you know what? I've thought about it and that doesn't feel right to me. Right.
Hmm.
That's an emotional authority. It's somebody who has to ride the wave of how their body feels about it. So looking at your type, which is, those five types, like I said, and your authority, I think would be the biggest things to begin with. Hmm.
How long have you been following it?
How long have I been following it? This
And you
this is
teach it,
almost
right?
Yeah, I teach it. This is almost embarrassing when I answer this question. Okay, so I have a genius IQ and EQ, so I can learn something really, 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 really fast, take it apart, put it back together, and then teach it really simply. So I've only learned Gene Keys, and well, I learned Gene Keys about 3 years ago. I learned human design about 3.5 years ago. And I learned I Ching about 3 years ago. And I've since then written courses and stuff about it and teach it. Yeah.
Well, that's enough time to develop a serious theory about it too.
It
Yeah.
is, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I feel bad because people are like, oh wow, how long have you been studying this? And I don't want to give people the ideal or the false belief that they're going to get into it and all of a sudden they're going to be able to, break it down, spit it out, and do that. So I don't want to set this false ideal that it's that fast. It normally is not that fast. And I don't want people to get overwhelmed. It's fantastic information, really wonderful to have. And I think if you feel like you're getting overwhelmed, just back up a little bit and use the importance and remember the importance of integration.
Hmm.
Integration is so much more important than learning something new. So yeah.
Um, you teach it, right?
Hmm.
What is your course like that people work when they're working with you?
That I teach in two different ways. I teach it with my holistic intuitive practitioner course, and so
Hmm.
that's a 5 month journey with me and mentoring with me and people all over the world. At the end of that course, they've learned the flow method, they've learned human design, gene keys, brain patterns, also the homeopathy, all kinds of things, methylation,
Hmm.
epigenetics. So that's like 5 months, and they'll learn it in there. But also, I offer a monthly community membership where they access an online course and they learn all about human design and gene keys and brain patterns in there. So that one's you just sign up for a month, see if you like it, get in there, do the information, play in it. I'm in there, and I do a Zoom every Wednesday as mentorship and training in that monthly community as well. And so if you have any questions, I'm in there every Tuesday answering questions. So there's two different ways. Yeah.
You craft the flow method is your craft, right? What was that process like to sort of, was it you kind of put the pieces together and said, here's a simpler way to do that? Is that kind of, did you blend things
No,
and
I
kind
got
of
really
discover your own
frustrated.
process?
Yeah, I got really frustrated because I had learned so many modalities,
Hmm.
reflexology, cranial
Yeah,
sacral, homeopathy in three different ways,
right.
and I learned so many different things that when I was working with someone, I didn't, it's like, where do you begin? Do you begin by looking, I mean, you do the intake form and you're like, okay, this is their diet, this is their sleep, this is their grounding, this is their
Right.
medication supplements. But from there, it's like, okay, well, where do we go from here? Because there's so many different ways to approach this, right?
Hmm.
And that's when I was like, okay, I'm really, honestly, frustration. I'm like, I'm really sick and tired of this. I want to know what they want. Like, what do you actually want? Like, if I could like wave a magic wand, and be like, okay, ta-da, what do you want to happen?
Right.
And when I started asking that, I started realizing nobody knows what the heck they want, right? And I was like, wow, this is really a problem. And it was at the same time that I was learning about brain patterns. I was like, if they don't even know how to say what they want, they're not going to be able to create the brain patterns to get and achieve what they want,
Do
right?
you think that's because they're in survival state?
I think it's because not necessarily survival state. I think it's that it seems so foreign to us as humans that it could be this easy. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think
Yeah.
one of the periods we can't reproduce in our life is our childhood. You can't go through that process where you have no prefrontal cortex for 7 years. It's like
Mm-hmm.
that scripting that happens to us is pure. We're pure emotions. We're not
Mm-hmm.
any thought processes. I'm watching my grandson
Mm-hmm.
grow up in front of me, and I'm realizing I have a massive influence on him. So I pour love into him, and he responds because it's
Mm-hmm.
positive. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we don't have that luxury as adults to go have that same experience. It's a working through process of learning how to
Mm-hmm.
face fear. Dr. Hawkins always says the beginning of positive is always courage. And courage is really love for the self. It's saying
Mm-hmm.
this is worth, like, your goal idea. I love that because you're giving people a positive thought to focus on and go after and manifest.
Mhm,
you
mhm,
know and guess what, you can manifest that all day long, this idea that is your goal. So
mhm. Well, and then everything that you're doing is after that. You had used a term of confirmation bias earlier. It might have been before we began recording, but confirmation bias is so true. You know, you go looking for a vehicle and you're like, I'm going to
Hmm.
get a red Jeep. And then you get there and you're like, you know what? I really love this yellow minivan. And everywhere you go, you're now going to notice a minivan or a yellow vehicle or a yellow minivan, right? That's that
Hmm.
confirmation bias. They were all there before, but now you're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
everywhere I go, I just noticed this
You
thing,
notice
right?
them. Yeah.
Yeah. And then that's confirmation bias. So we have confirmation bias, whether it be us confirming the bias of our symptoms, which are valid. They're there. Those cars were always there. We're just noticing them now. You know, those
Hmm.
symptoms may have been there and they might be real, but now we're super noticing them and we're supporting it. And it's a root system that we're watering versus let's have a confirmation bias and a root system that we're watering of something positive that we actually do want to pour energy into and support. And so it puts the energy and the focus on what we want to experience versus what we're trying to suppress. And then all the other things from Eastern and Western medicine really at that point just become support, which is what they should be.
Hmm.
They're almost like, I don't want to use the word band-aids, but they're almost like band-aids and support. But it gives us and puts us back into the authority of what we're actually working towards. Hmm.
Well, it's not survival state as much as it may be just, I don't want anything bad to happen to me, which is a defensive posture. It's not going
Hmm.
after anything. It's like, okay, world, I've had enough. I literally do just want to survive. If I can enjoy a beer at night, I'm happy, but it's like they live in a defensive state, which is missing out. And
Hmm.
I think that's what I love about your concept is it puts a focus on something positive that they decide, it's not decided
Hmm.
for them, and they have to earn and take responsibility for, because there's tremendous value in being responsible for yourself in creating that life.
Yeah,
you know
Hippocrates is quoted as saying, ask what someone is willing to give up before you're willing to help heal him. I don't know that Hippocrates really said it or
Mm.
not, but it is very true that even when I've worked with people over the years, I've worked with a lot of communities and people over the years, and there are times where I have just donated appointment times or donated courses or whatever. And every single time that that's happened, there was not an energy exchange for them to feel
Yep.
connected to that in an ownership of it. And
Hmm.
because they don't feel connected in an ownership of it, they find one reason or another where even if I worked on them and they were better, it doesn't hold the same way. It's not the
Hmm.
same energy exchange. It just isn't.
Hmm.
Now I will say that I have had appointments with people where they have been through the ringer by the time that they see me, and so they've already had that
Hmm.
energy exchange. They've already had that ownership. You know, they really
Yeah.
have, where they really have put in the time, the money, the whatever it may be. But the people who just were like, yeah, my friend told me about what you do, and I can't, and she bought it for me. That's not the same. It's never the
Hmm.
same. You know, yeah.
I love your idea of energy exchange. I've never heard it put exactly like that. But what came up for me is Jesus said, your faith has healed you. And I
Mhm,
think it's the recognition of the healed one
mhm.
recognizing their own energy that's already there. You're
I
not
love
creating
that you
anything,
I love
you
that you
know?
brought up that concept, and I don't know
Yeah.
why, but it makes me tear up. Actually, I know why it makes me tear up now that I take a second to think about it. There are so many people that I have worked with who have autistic children who were nonverbal, but when I work with an autistic child, um, with biofeedback, I can access their brain patterns and their thoughts. One was even one was so clear that I told the mom, hey, as a follow up, you need to get her paints and watercolors. She really wants to do that. And the mother started crying, and she said, how did you know that? And I said, well, I do biofeedback. I can hear it from her body. You know, like I can just tell. And she said nobody else knows that she used to paint, and she hasn't done that in years. And the reason I bring that up is because when you said the energy exchange, I remember in learning this journey of helping people along the way, and I remember coming from the church hearing, well, if they were just saved, if they were just saved, if they just prayed about it. Yet
Right.
again and again, when I searched scripture, it was your faith has made you well, not your belief in me, your faith. And I'm a Bible believing Christian, but I'm not here to tell you what to
Right.
believe in. But it was the faith. It wasn't the faith in him. It was the faith that they are healed,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I was like, man, when I started seeing that more and more and spending time
Yeah.
with God, I'm like, you're right, again and again. And then to push it even further, there were times where I had nonverbal autistic children or someone who wanted me to work on a loved one. And they said, will it work, even if they're not here? And in the appointment time. And I said, do you remember the story of the centurion? And the centurion came to Jesus and he was pleading for his daughter. And Jesus said, go home, your daughter's well. The daughter wasn't able to speak. The daughter wasn't able to
Mhm.
send him. Lazarus wasn't able to speak. Lazarus wasn't able to have faith and cry out. It was the interceding. And even though there's, scripturally, there's one mediator between God and man, but there is an interceding. Even Moses acted like that. We're supposed to be interceding for each other in faith, in prayer. And that interceding is an energy exchange. And we are able to do that interceding, whether it be someone that is our child who has autism, or whether it be us caring for someone else, we are able to have that interceding and that same energy exchange in that faith where people are able to be made well. Yeah.
What is your hope for this next year? I mean, you work with people, but what's your big goal here? Not
My
to
big goal. Like,
just like what's your thing in your first step? What is that thing for
yeah,
you coming up?
I put years into creating something that's called a 30-day transformation program where exhausted mothers can retrain their children on how to eat, even if they're toddlers. And it has PDFs on teaching toddlers how to recognize and regulate their nervous system to create a new nervous system baseline. So this future generations, even though mom's exhausted, she doesn't have to figure it all out. She doesn't have to study the brain. She doesn't have to do anything. She can literally post up PDFs, and this next generation is more resilient with the renewing of the mind. That has been my heart's desire, is to truly equip these future generations. And so my hope is to reach 21,000. I don't know why that number, but 21,000 people getting that in the next 6 months. And my other hope is to have another 100 holistic intuitive practitioners sign up to go out into the world. So those are my two hopes, because for every practitioner that goes out into the world, oh, my Christ, again, whoa. Yeah, for every practitioner that goes out into the world, the testimonies that come back from their work it's just phenomenal. It's phenomenal. Yeah, it's
Do you think
beautiful.
it's possible, just from your sense of whatever's happening here in your third eye, do you think it's possible that there's a tipping point of healing
Mm,
culturally? Because here's what I see happening. I see the healing concept accelerating dramatically. Coaching is the fastest growing business on the internet. There's a
yeah,
reason.
I don't think it's necessarily. I think it would depend on what your thought process is on a tipping point. I believe that everything happens in an ebb and a flow. And I believe if we're looking at the macro and micro, we're also looking at like the landscape of what's happening in the world. Um, yeah, my answer would be about 15 minutes. So I won't delve into all of it right now. Sorry, but it truly in the most summarized way would be about 15 minutes. Um, I would say that we go into different versions of enlightenment, and none are greater or lesser than the ones previous. They're just different expressions of it, is what I would say. Personally, I think when Jesus said, I go to my father's house to prepare a place for you, in my father's house are many mansions, he was talking about dimensions, because even scientifically, we know that we're interdimensional creatures and beings. I believe in every dimension, it's not a different place. Time doesn't exist scientifically. I believe I think it's energy being experienced. And I think every time energy is experienced, it experiences itself to a point that it can't experience very many more variables, and then it begins again. That's the best way I can summarize that. And I think
No,
the
that's a great
healing that we're
answer.
at is probably nearing that, because I know that telepathy is becoming more um, well it's becoming easier to access, which is really just quantum entanglement.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so we're at that tipping point of being entangled, and once we're entangled to that extent, we're at the tipping point of beginning again. Yeah, because then you can experience every experience all simultaneously at once as everybody. So you'd have to be at the tipping point. Does all that make sense? Sorry.
Well, Alan
I feel
Watts
like it's a
said
great
that
question.
it's all just a dream God is having to amuse himself or to amuse oneself. So I
Yeah.
completely, the multiverse is God's every perspective. It's
There were
how
years
God,
ago, yeah. I create really, really, really extreme amount of DMT naturally, and found that out from my brain scans. But years ago, so I've always been able to, like, what people have to go through a journey with ayahuasca to do, I can do
hmm
naturally, just
hmm
naturally. And years ago, I remember just being in prayer, and I could see that humans are like the synaptic connections, and depending on how complex that human's beliefs are, their experiences are, it's almost like a neural pathway in the universe
hmm
that's actually like God's brain. And each of
hmm
us are like a thought, like we're a synaptic connection or neural pathway, you know?
hmm
And I thought, wow, that was so cool. I remember having that realization that we are his we are his like electrical synaptic connections, you know? I don't know how to explain it because it's like you can see it, but it's like you can't put it into words. And I think Jesus and every great teacher had that challenge too, that this very physical slowed down reality, E equals MC squared, energy slowed down becomes matter. This slowed down reality is hard to it's hard to articulate what makes the slowed down reality because it's much faster. It's not slowed down, so it's harder to articulate. Yeah.
Well, you're talking about the concept of realizing, hey, we're all source.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very healing place for me, especially in
Mhm.
regards to death. That took away the sting of death because I realized, oh, I'm not like Jonathan is my avatar, but I'm absorbed into source and I'm not going to die. That was actually a huge shift for me to realize,
Mhm.
okay, there's more than death.
Mhm.
And I didn't have to, because like when I was growing up, I don't know if you ever experienced this growing up, I was like so worried that I was going to go to hell. And
Yeah, what's funny is I never had that experience. I
you
never did. Yeah.
you saved yourself a lot of trauma. I actually think hell is probably the most traumatizing thing the church does.
I
Uh,
think so. Yeah, I had a pastor one time who was preaching about hell, and at that time, my brain kind of did the thing it does with high
mhm,
DMT, where I could just see something. And at that
right.
time, whether you want to call it God revealed to me, whatever your belief system is, I
hmm
say it through my understanding. God revealed to me, hell
hmm
is hell is the illusion of separation from Him, and
Yeah,
that's why it's burning because
it's trying to tell you.
scientifically, yeah, scientifically, there's no such thing as cold. There's only absence of heat. There's no such
hmm
thing as darkness. There's only absence of light, scientifically.
hmm
Just like there's no such thing as actual darkness and wickedness, there's absence of God's presence. So when people say,
hmm
well, why is there darkness and wickedness? Why does God let it? It's where He's not.
hmm
It's the absence of God's
There's no
presence.
thing. And that's the
E-
hard part of the duality is
yeah.
you have to embrace the idea. Like here's what I think the Garden of Eden is basically you have two major dualities, but the one that's really going to screw with you is this tree. And you have a judgment of good, because all Genesis 1 is you're good, you're good, you're good, you're good, you're good, 7 times. And then they get to the tree of knowledge, which asks the question, are you good? And
Mm-hmm.
they can choose evil, which is the absence of judgment of good, or they can choose
Mm-hmm.
good. And that's what God is trying to say is the duality has both, but this one always produces life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's literally that simple in terms of changing those neural pathways and scripts in our body is all we have to do is consistently shift our body from I'm not good to I am good. That's Christ consciousness.
Well, and if
And
you look
that,
at, yeah, I so I remember I did have a fear growing up. Now that you're saying that, I had a
mm-hmm,
fear of blasphemy, and
mm-hmm,
I
that
didn't
was
want to
mine.
dishonor him. And it
Yeah, that
wasn't
was
because I
mine.
feared going to hell. It's because I feared. I don't know how to explain this, but it's almost like little me feared hurting his heart.
Mm-hmm,
Like I just felt like, "Ah, you're so good, God," and I always knew that. Actually, anybody who watches this, if you go back in the video, like, I didn't start going to church until I was older. But my dad, I remember telling me, that I was asking about who was Jesus when I was 3 and I'd never been to church in my life. It's like I just always knew, you know? And that's God's grace. But I just always knew. So I didn't blaspheme his name. But his one name that stands true throughout all of Scripture, again and again and again, no matter what your belief system is I am. He even said,
Mm-hmm.
Who do I say sends me? I am. Tell them I am. And so when we're saying I am, and then you fill it in with something negative, you're blaspheming the name of God, and you're one with God. Like you're literally blaspheming God. So
Yourself.
just,
Yes.
yes. And then through confirmation bias, you actually produce that,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And
And that's how
so,
we produce evil, which doesn't exist.
yeah,
That's
it's a
the
not. It's
logical.
called,
Right.
yeah, if you look up the definition of sin in the Bible, it's like a missing of the mark. That's one of the
Mm-hmm.
definitions for it. Is
Mm-hmm.
it's something that's an off. Yeah.
Yeah, but we
Mm-hmm.
needed Jesus to remind us that the rules of the game started with grace. And I think
Mm-hmm.
we've really missed out on that grace over the last 2,000 years. And people are beginning to wake up. They're kind of letting go of a lot of the old religiosity. And I
Mm-hmm.
see a lot of people really coming back to, oh, there's a lot of wisdom in what Jesus is saying. And it kind of now matches with what science is saying. And so
Mm-hmm.
I just have this, like you say, it's almost like a feeling. I have that a lot too. And I just have learned more, just listen to them. Don't try and judge them, just listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we're something major is emerging in regards to healing. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
something, and it's, I think it's close. I don't know. I see people being interested in their healing. And that's why I invited you on is I want to encourage people to listen to her program. It's probably one of the closest that I could probably validate or just suggest, because I love the simple methodology. That's the
Thank
brilliance of it.
you.
It's consistent with science. It's uh, people establish their own goal and they do their own work. So you have no barriers, and that is beautiful simplicity to me. Jen, it's been an absolute
Thank
pleasure having
you.
you on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it so much.
Absolutely. So to all of our guests, it's Thursday here. Rich, if you're out there, hope it went well today. And to all of our listeners, please comment, review. Would love to have you follow us on Instagram. And have an amazing weekend, everybody. Much love.